All right, we're recording now. I haven't got last week's recording up. I have to find it and put it up yet, but it'll be there. So that today is a crazy day. I'll have to leave right at 10 to go make some other recordings, and hopefully I'll be back on time at 10:30. But it depends if I can get them to move. But next week, we'll do Pauline Christology, and that's up there. We'll do that the first half of next week, and then for the second half of next week, we'll review for the midterm. The midterm will be an in-class, handwritten, short answer questions, and you'll have the questions next week, and we'll talk about the answers to them. So, like before, the whole point of the midterm is it's supposed to be its own learning experience. So these are looking back at the questions I've given you week to week, selecting, I think, 8 of them. And I'll pick 4 of them randomly for each of you. So they come in actually pairs so you have one or the other for each week. And then you answer 3 of them. And the idea is this is the stuff that you should really understand at this point and should be in your mind. So you can just do a mind dump onto the page. And then it's all there. So you remember it for later. We'll talk more about that next week. But questions about that? No? Okay. Let me close up some things so I can bring this over. So we are on John's Gospel. Yeah, okay. So I have 7 questions there. Shall we? Last week it worked well by if one is particularly difficult, that might be the best place to start. So we jump right into what you think you aren't quite understanding in the readings. Because to me, the readings are pretty straightforward, but I've been through this a bunch of times. So did you think the reading was straightforward? Or do you think there's still some stuff from the reading that you don't understand? And we'll start with that. Mac Anthony.
Thank you, Father. The confusion I have from the reading, particularly in the first paragraph reading, and that should also be part of the question you asked in the number 1 question. Who, I mean, the writer of the Gospel, John the Beloved, John the Evangelist, are they the same, one and the same person?
Have you had, all of you, have you had a class in New Testament yet? Each, if you could answer that, just so I know the level of where to answer, how to answer this question.
I have not had.
Okay. Gabriel?
Yes, I had introduction to New Testament.
Okay. Titus and Moses?
Yes, Father.
Okay. And Moses?
Yes.
Okay. So I think, as I recall, when we were together, I started the class we looked at the beginning of Luke's gospel, where Luke says what he's doing, and that he wasn't there. He didn't meet Jesus. He interviewed everybody, and he wrote this orderly account. We went through that, right? Well, this is building off of that, but we didn't talk about this, but the reading goes through it very well. So John's gospel is probably not in its final form until about the year 100, 110, the last to get in its final form. If you look at John's gospel very closely, there's John, who was one of the apostles who Jesus called, James and his brother John, sons of thunder. And then at the end of the gospel quits calling him John and refers to somebody called the beloved disciple. And of course, at a first reading, of course, the beloved disciple is John, but why the name change? And that got people thinking. And it seems to be that when the gospel is written, the beloved disciple is indeed John, who this community gets its main source of Jesus material from. So John seems to be the person who came to the community in which this gospel is written, and he's the wisdom source connecting everybody to Jesus. But by the time it's written, he's long dead. And in calling him the beloved disciple, one of the things that John the apostle got conveyed to his community is, you are all Jesus's beloved disciples. So in the gospel, he's standing in place, meeting Jesus, but everyone in the community is supposed to identify with them as if they were there, as if they're as loved by Jesus as he was, because he was certainly loved. But that person who was the apostle doesn't seem to be the person who wrote the majority of this gospel. It seems like it was brought together mostly by someone later, and then it was put together at the end even later than that. Why do we say that? Why a later hand finished the gospel and gave it to us in the form that we have now? Well, there's two reasons that to point out. One would be at the end of chapter 20. Let me just bring this up and I'll show you here. Where's my Bible? There it is. Yes. My Bible likes to take over the whole screen. I never know why, but I'll put it here so I can share it with you. Share screen. Entire screen. Screen 2. Share. So we're going to do John 20. And I guess I need to make that text bigger. There we go. All right, so this is John 20, right? And the resurrection, and Mary finds, show my screen anyway. It thinks we're going to get in an infinite regress. So this is the resurrection with Jesus. And then this is John 21. Look how John 20 ends. Jesus is resurrected. He sends off the apostles. We even have doubting Thomas, and blessed are those who have not seen and have believed. Now, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written that you may come to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through this belief you may have life in his name. That looks like the end of the gospel. That's what you write at the end of the book. I gave you all these things so that you can believe. So I'm done writing. And then we have this. After this, Jesus revealed himself again. This really looks like an addition to John's gospel. The original version ended here, and then this is added. Who added it? Well, we assume the hand of the person who put the final version together. He decided we need this one more story. This is the first breakfast of the resurrection. Now it says here, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, you know that I love you. Look at this. Peter turned and saw the disciple following whom Jesus loved, the beloved disciple, John, eponymously, the one who had also reclined upon his chest during the supper and had said, Master, who is the one? Again, John, right? But he's the beloved disciple at this point. He's not named as John. When Peter saw him, he said to Jesus, Lord, what about him? And Jesus said to Peter, what if I want him to remain until I come, that is, return again? What concern is that of yours? You follow me. So word spread among the brothers that the disciple would not die, but Jesus didn't say he wouldn't die. He just said, what is it to you? So what this story does is it gets a further thing, because John the evangelist did die, and the people reading this when it was written know that he died. And there's a story that he wasn't going to die. And the person who gave us the final version of John's gospel gives us this to say, right, that story was never true. Here's what really happened. Jesus never said John wouldn't die. John never said John wouldn't die. Yes, John's dead, but that doesn't go against what Jesus said or what you are to believe. So it's just one more indication that there's multiple people writing this gospel. If you look at the final form of the gospel, there are touchstones that really go with the letters attributed to John. You know, we have 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, where God is love, and everybody who lives in love lives in God. Those seem to be by the same hand that assembled this final version of the gospel. So they're a later hand. Also, when we look at the prologue of John's gospel, which we do a lot here, that looks like something that was added onto the gospel. This use of the word logos that's so important in the prologue, it's the center of the prologue. That Jesus is the word, logos, and it appears nowhere else in the gospel. Well, if the same person kind of wrote the whole thing, we'd have that coming in the rest of the gospel, but we don't. So that seems to be something that the final editor of the gospel added. The reason these are important to note, and that's the point of my first question. One of the basic insights I want you to understand in this class, and we did it in Trinity as well, is how we developed the notion of Jesus as Christ. That Jesus, what we believe about Jesus and his being the Messiah and what that means for us, Jesus didn't teach unambiguously, and everybody wrote it down, and it has been the same since. Jesus was in the world in such a powerful way and so transparently holy and presenting us God that it took generations to understand the depth of what he must have really been like to be that holy, to be that transparent, to do what he said he came to do, which is to open for us the gates of heaven, to be the Messiah, but in a different way than the political Messiah that people were looking for. It took a long time, hundreds of years, for the church to understand Jesus that way. And so even in this gospel, we see a development from the early material that comes from John, the beloved apostle, the one Jesus called and knew Jesus, traveled with Jesus, to the final collector of this gospel. There's at least 50 years of development. So that's what it's important for us to be open to and see. Already we see the understanding of Jesus develop as the gospel is being written. And seeing this as the latest gospel says, so we would expect a more developed understanding of Christology than we see in the other gospels. We should expect to see something more primitive in Mark, a little more developed in Matthew and Luke, but then we should expect that John gives us even a bit more because it's later and the community has been thinking about this. And you really see that in the prologue, which is nothing that came from the mouth of Jesus, right? It's a story about who Jesus is. Who wrote it? Well, it never says Jesus dictated this or somebody in his day did. It's something written later about him. And in this final chapter 21, we see development. Yes, there was this rumor that John wasn't going to die, but Jesus never said that. He told Peter, don't worry about it. You worry about doing the will of God, and I'll worry about John. So, Mac Anthony, that was a long, long answer to your question. But now what do you think about that answer? There you go.
Particularly about John the Beloved. He is the one that had, and the idea that he presented now packaged bit by bit, pieces by pieces over time until the final editor, who we have seen has retracted this, what we have today as the gospel. We call him the evangelist, but the name not known. So we appreciate the fact that it has come over a long period of time, evidenced by the addition of the prologue and some other idea that seem to reflect that it's not one man's idea that has been consistent over the gospel passages.
That this is a whole community's idea that the evangelist is writing down and giving voice to, bringing everybody together. But the thoughts are not just his thoughts. They really capture the thoughts of the founder, who was probably John the Apostle, but then with the addition of what everybody's been thinking and living through. And he's capturing that. So other things, his gospel is also much more symbolic. Jesus is always, when he heals somebody, it's not just the fact that Jesus healed somebody, it's always a symbol of who Jesus is, and people understand it or they don't understand it. And he's always challenging them. Do you understand the signs, or are you just here because you got fed? When Jesus walks on water, do you understand? Because only God walks on water. So John's gospel is lots of symbolism and darkness and light. And he's even less than Luke was attached to, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. John's really, what does it all mean? Titus.
Okay, thank you very much, Father. So I just want to make a contribution to the authorship of the book of John, the Gospel of John. And for me, as I continue to read the Gospel according to John, there are elements that point to the fact that there is no single authorship, but rather a community that, in a way of preserving, interpreting, and deepening the witness of the beloved disciple, then they came about writing the gospel according to John. So it is the book of the Bible that's actually originated or born out of the witness of John the Baptist. That is why in some portions we will hear the pronoun like we instead of I. So it's a compilation of witnesses, or it's a compilation of interpretations that are coming from what John witnessed and had shared with the people. So, for example, they will write that at the end, he said, so a report spread among the followers of Jesus that this disciple will not die.
Right.
But Jesus did not say that he will not die. He said, if I want him to live until I come, what is that to you? He is the disciple who spoke of these things, the one who also wrote them down, and we know that what he said is true. So they are just giving an interpretation, they are also preserving, and they are also deepening what the one who witnessed, whatever scene, whatever event that is associated to Jesus. So that is how this book came about.
Exactly. Well said. Let me also add one more piece that Gergen adds. I wouldn't say that it is universally accepted, but it's generally accepted to be that people agree with him. John's gospel also has a lot of touchstones, a lot of similarities to what became Gnostic writings, Gnostic from knowledge. And that is the idea that there is some secret knowledge, and if you have that, then you'll be saved, you'll be divinized. If you know some facts, and so Jesus being the Logos, the Word, he's an idea, and if you understand that idea, then you're saved. Versus a Pauline faith in Jesus, this isn't it. It's specific knowledge, a secret that Jesus knew that can be imparted to you. That's Gnostic. The church didn't go that way. The church renounced those Gnostic viewpoints. It seems in John's community, there were people who were more in line with where the mainstream went, and there were Gnostics. And there are other readings from this community that weren't included in the Bible, and they are more Gnostic. And so it seems like the community split in the end. This community that wrote this split, and the ones who became Gnostic drifted away from the church, and the ones who wrote these had an Orthodox faith and stayed with the church. And so the church picked up their writings and said, yes, that's us, and not those others, not that Gnostic stuff. But there's hints of it in here, but then this also goes away from that. So there's touchstones between John's gospel and Gnosticism, and the church split over that, and the Gnostics left. Any other questions about that first question? It also then touches, the last thing I said, it touches the fact of John's gospel is the last written, but it's also the last one that communities really embraced. We don't get until, I don't remember, around 385 or something, where the communities finally sat down and said, so what do we hold as really inspired? We have these new writings about Christianity, what we would call the New Testament. What's in and what's out? And the communities all got together and decided what's in and what's out. John's gospel is one of those things that was the last to be widely adopted in the community. And by the time it gets 385 or 95, whenever that was, excuse me, it does get accepted because by that point it's widely accepted. But it took a while, and part of that was because part of John's community became Gnostic, and they wanted to make sure, but not those writings, but these ones, yes. And as Gergen points out, if we didn't have the prologue of John's gospel, all that logos stuff, our Christology would look different. Any other questions about that development? All right. Does somebody want to suggest the next question to go on to? No. Okay. So the main sections of the gospel, that's a simple one. There's the prologue, and then there's what's called the book of signs. And that's what I alluded to before. It's not that Jesus did. He gave this sign. All his actions are symbolic. And then, what was the other half called? Now it's escaping me. These are all the signs. No. Who can tell me? I can't, it's escaping me at the moment. What's the second half of the book called? The Book of Glory. Yeah, there we go. The Book of Glory. Because Jesus is glorified. In John's Gospel, Jesus doesn't die a horrible death, suffering. That's when he completes everything. And that is when he is glorified. When he dies, that's when he is completely glorified, because he's done what he came to do. And he explains that well in a long 4 chapters of his last discourse on the night before he died. He's explaining what's going to happen to his disciples. Now, did he really explain all that to his disciples on that last night? Who knows? I doubt they would have remembered it if he did. But that's how this gospel works. Here's all these signs, and then here's him. Now it's time for him to be glorified. And the height of his glory is when he dies on that cross, fulfilling what he came to do. And then after the Book of Glory, we have that strange resurrection in chapter 21. That's just a addendum to the gospel. Like the prologue is a prologue. It wasn't part of the original gospel. So 3, in what way is a Johannine Christology from above? a step beyond what we find in the synoptics. That is, how has John's gospel moved Christology forward? So let me ask you, each person, tell me some way where you understand how John's gospel is from above, not from below. The first to talk has it easiest.
Uh,
Whichever, Gabriel or Mac Anthony, who wants to go first?
Let him go.
Okay.
I go.
Yeah, go ahead, Gabriel.
Father, repeat the question.
John's
But-
Christology is from above.
Yes.
Call it from above. What does that mean? Give me an example why we say his Christology is from above, where the synoptics is from below.
Mm.
Okay, Mac Anthony, go ahead.
Okay, Father, thank you. The other synoptic gospels, they emphasize on Jesus being lower than God. Okay, Jesus being lower than God. Whereas the fourth gospel, which we are looking at, it towards and presents Jesus as being equal to God. In other words, there is emphasis on, from above, unlike the other one that emphasizes the Christology of Jesus as being from below.
Okay,
Uh,
that's a
Father?
start. Very good. Gabriel, what do you think?
Yes, I think in other gospel, Jesus is represented as the Messiah. He's like a God agent on earth, servant,
Okay.
like the one who reveals God through his action and through his action, I mean through his works. But now in John, Jesus is just angel, but one who come down from heaven.
And what makes you say that? You're right. What makes you say that? Give me an example of what John's gospel says, come down from heaven.
Hmm.
All right, I'll give you a pass for now because Titus has his hand up. Go ahead,
Okay.
Titus.
Okay, thank you very much, Father. So, if you read the synoptic gospels, we will understand that each of them had a way of helping us to understand Christ, to understand Jesus, especially when it comes to his identity. So while we will realize that these synoptic gospels, they trace Jesus's identity from his ministry, miracles, sufferings, and resurrection, which suggests an enfoldment that comes from below. But with John's gospel, his purpose is for us to understand Jesus as God, or the one who is with God. Therefore, he begins with his pre-existence, his incarnation, and divine identity. And this becomes the fundamental doctrine of Christology or theology. So, what informs our understanding about Jesus's identity is because of the thought or the purpose of the writer. So, what was the purpose of of the book of Matthew? What was the purpose of the book of Mark? What was the purpose of book of Luke? So, John's purpose is to portray Jesus as God Himself, the revelation of God Himself, rather than the one who came, was born by a woman. He ate with sinners,
Mhm.
you know, so something like that. But he preferred that, okay, he came, he pre-existed, and he was, incarnate to be among us,
Ex-
so that to be able to do
Exactly.
that distinction.
So
Yes.
the Gospels don't have a pre-existence of Jesus. They have his birth and the things he did, which show that he's the Messiah, but it's the things he did that show he's the Messiah. So it comes from below. From his birth, he grows into being the Messiah. We have this, he exists before his birth, his pre-existence, and he comes down. Moses.
Thank you so much, Father. Yeah, Brother Titus said exactly what I wanted to say. So, for me, the major distinctive factor in John's gospel, as what distinguishes John's gospel from that of the synoptics, lies in his understanding of Jesus' messiahship. So, the as Brother Titus rightly said, the synoptics understood Jesus as a human Messiah who has come to establish the kingdom of God on earth as a human being. So, but John focuses on Jesus' sonship as someone coming from above, coming from the Father. That's why he keeps saying, "Before Abraham was, I am." So he comes from above. He focuses on Jesus' sonship, and as the definitive revelation of God here on earth.
Excellent. Yep. That's exactly it. And kind of the main focus of the prologue is about he exists before anything, and all things came to be through him, which refers back to Genesis, right? When God spoke the word and it happened. So everything comes through Jesus. And he pre-exists all of those things. So he's not a part of creation. He is the one through whom creation happens. Who just had their hand up? Sorry.
Yes, Father. Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. What my brothers have said are very, very correct. There is another thing which I would like to add, and which I appreciate the most in the writing of John while I was reading it. Against other writers, the other synoptic writers, gospel writers, they make a distinction between here and there, between earth and heaven. Okay. But in John, we see, if we read it, that blend. Okay. That dichotomy is blurred, just like the writer puts it. So it is fused, and that fusion is manifested, concretized in Jesus Christ. So that fusion now presents Jesus as pre-existing, okay? Pre-existing, manifesting. So that is one feature of John which now separates him from other writers. So that pre-existence first, before his incarnation, and then the glorification, which is manifested also in his passion and resurrection, which we see in chapter 20, chapter 13 to chapter 20.
Yeah, and it's a pre-existence that doesn't go against what the other gospels said, because Luke, for instance, with his story of the Annunciation, the angel Gabriel said to Mary, "You're going to have a child. How can that be? I don't know, man." Well, God, the Holy Spirit will come upon you, and so it will be the Son of God. Not, well, then it is, Jesus is clearly a piece of God in some way, but that's not really talking about his pre-existence. Pre-existence is going along, is extending that. But it's not unknown in the synoptics, but it's not anything worked out there. And in John's gospel, it's starting to work out. And as Moses said, before Moses, I am. And I am the bread come down from heaven in John chapter 6. And it's my Father who gave you that bread, and I am now the bread come down from heaven. So Jesus has clearly existed in heaven before his birth and has come down. So that's why it's from above. And it's a new way of looking at things. Or at least with this kind of power and force. And John, the prologue has it in spades, as we say, but it also appears in other places in John's gospel that Jesus is from above in ways that we just don't see. At his death in the Garden of Gethsemane, I think he does, he talks about, I'm returning to my Father. I'm returning because I was there before. Not going to God, like saints will say later, but I'm returning to my Father. So in all those ways, John's gospel really moves theology forward by talking about Jesus as from above and talking about his pre-existence. So that's question 3 mostly. Any other thoughts about that? What does it mean that John's theology is from above? And the synoptics are from below. Jesus earns his messiahship. He acts it out, so we see him as Messiah, but it's from his actions. And in Luke's story of the Annunciation, we have, of course, because he's God's son. But John's gospel is much more clear. It is who he is from before the world was created. And he has come to bring us that complete revelation of God's word that he is. And so that's why when he dies, yeah, I'm done. It is finished. That's my glory. I did everything I came to do. And interestingly, people don't make too much of this, but I think it's quite interesting. In the Synoptic Gospels, they always say that the Father raised Jesus to life. Because he was obedient, he was raised back to life. It doesn't say that in John's gospel. It said death could have no hold on him. Jesus rose because he had to rise. Death can't hold him. He's the author of life. That's a very different way of understanding it. If he pre-existed before life was even created, then death has no hold on him. That's a furthering of what it means to be Christ. Shall we go on to the next one? Let me see. Yeah, so then the next one is back to this prologue here. Question 4. What is the relationship between the Logos and God in the prologue? What else do we know about Jesus from the prologue? So what's the relationship between Jesus and God? And when I say God, what am I talking about? See if you can. This is a trick question. When I say God, who am I talking about? What do you think? Like when it says here, the Word was with God. What does it mean by God there? Gabriel, go ahead.
I think John mentioned as being Word is mentioned as being with God. I think the God described here is a divine. The Word was God. The Word was God. And I think this establishes the unity and also the distinction of Logos, which is Word, and God's divine nature, yet is not identical with the Father.
Okay, yeah. Would others like to weigh in? What I find interesting here, everything is interesting. This is so, the Word, we're going to find out later, pitched his tent among us. And that is Jesus of Nazareth, that guy who lived 2,000 years ago. So this is talking about before there was even a world. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Well, which is it? Is the Word with God, or is the Word God? And I think this is what's really true about John's gospel. This is really true about the prologue, but it's carried through the gospel. The Word, Jesus is God, but yet God is other than Jesus. And we would come to later use the word the Father, meaning God the Father, which is how everybody thought of God before Jesus came along. It was just God was God the Father. That's all of God, God the Father. And what John is doing here is community is starting to understand Jesus is God, but Jesus is not the Father. He's really God, but he's with the Father, who is really God. How can that be? John doesn't answer that. He's got no answer for that. He simply says, what we've come to see is Jesus is God and is with God, so he's not completely God. And Jesus speaks of his Father, my Father and your Father, our God. So that's why we hold to calling God the first person of the Trinity the Father, because that's what Jesus is doing here. And in the Synoptics, he's calling God his Father. But here in a stronger way, where he is God and he isn't. He is God, but he's not the Father. And even when Thomas asks him in the last discourse, show us the Father. And Jesus says, Thomas, I've been here so long and you still don't know me? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. But I'm going back to him now. So in some way, Jesus completely reveals the Father, completely is equal to the Father, and is not. And John doesn't work that out for us. But he presents us with this strong, impossible view that we don't have in the Synoptics. They're not nearly as clear about this. He is, he isn't. And that's what'll take us hundreds of years to work out. Well, in what way is he, in what way isn't he? And that's when we finally get to three persons, one God. So what's distinctive of the three persons? That's what we looked at in Trinity. And we get to three persons, one God. But it takes us hundreds of years. And it's not here. It's not here in John's gospel. But the thing that forces us to go that way is here in John's gospel. But John didn't work it out. It took us hundreds of years to say, well, if what John is saying is true, and Luke is saying is true, and Paul is saying is true, then how are we to understand this? And we detailed some of that development. What's more important in this class, then, is not the development of the three persons, one God, but what does this prologue say about what it means for Jesus to be Christ, to be the Messiah? Part of that is, it's really God come down from heaven to save us. It's not just Joe Smo, who's great, this really great guy that God gives a little help to. No, God himself has come down. And not only that, the author of life. All things came to be through him. The one through whom we were all created has now come down to save us, to put things right. So what it means to be the Savior now, the Anointed One, is that he is completely reliable because he created all of this. He completely understands it because it all came through him. So that any sense of a limited messiahship, well, no, that can't be. The one who created all things is the perfect Messiah, the final Messiah. There's no half done. So if when he's finished, we still don't have our own nation, well, then the Messiah is not a political Messiah, right? Jesus was not a political Messiah. Things he did had implications on politics, but he did not give Israel back to the Jews and was not concerned to do that. So whatever it means to be the Messiah, the people who thought that that's what the Messiah was all about, if you're going to call Jesus the Christ and see him as John does as a definitive word, then that was never what God was actually talking about. That's not what the Messiahship is about. Because Jesus didn't come and fail. In John's gospel, Jesus succeeded perfectly at what he sent to do. Then what did he come to do? In what sense is he Messiah? I want to stop there for now. Let you think about that, because this is really the center of how John's moving things forward. He has a very clear view of what it means for Jesus to be the Messiah. And since there's a class in Christology, what does it mean that Jesus saved, that he's the anointed one? What does that even mean? John has a different view. Moses, I'm confused. Good, that's exactly where you should be at this moment. Do you want to say more than that now, or can I leave you with that? Mac Anthony.
Yes, Father. There is a place I got to when I was reading, and that the Word was with God, okay, showing distinctiveness in the two.
Right here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So the Logos being distinct, and then God being distinct, okay.
Mhm.
But the thing is that yes, they are together, and what connects them, what is common in the two, is the theos. Okay, I feel that it is that theos that is the common thing between them. That is what distinguishes. It is based on that Christ was able to come and then become Savior of us. If he hadn't that godness in him from above, I guess he wouldn't have been able to come down and save us as he did.
Yes, there's a few little ways you have to be very careful with language here. One is Jesus doesn't have God in him. He is God. Because other people in the synoptics, it could be that Jesus is a man who God raised to divinity. That doesn't seem to be what John's saying. Jesus in his very core is already God, and he's come down. So there is no Jesus that God enters. Jesus is God incarnate. But then can you see my screen? It says this funny thing, and this is what I pointed out before, the Word was with God, as Mac Anthony just said, but then it goes around and say, and the Word was God. Well, which one is he? Is he God or is he with God? Yes. It's John's answer. It's very confusing and meant to be. Because John doesn't have an answer to it. He's just asserting what he knows to be true, what the community has figured out. All right, I have to go record a video. Hopefully I'll be back in a half hour. If not, it won't be much longer. Wait for me, okay? And then we'll take this up and hopefully disambiguate. We'll understand more when we get back. But we should be confused a bit right now.
All right. So when you come back, you help me out, please.
Okay.
If he's
Yes.
confused, he can take rum.
All right. See you in a bit. Let me stop recording for now.